Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this TrAIN open lecture. Just to alert you to the fact that recording is in progress, so anything you say is being recorded. I'm Professor Malcolm Quinn, a member of TrAIN, and I'm very delighted this evening to welcome Alex Gill, who is giving the TrAIN open lecture tonight. I'm just going to briefly introduce Alex. Alex is Senior Lecturer and Associate Research Faculty of Digital Humanities in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at Yale University, where he teaches introductory and advanced courses in digital humanities and runs project-based learning and collective research initiatives. His research interests include Caribbean culture and history, digital humanities, and technology design for different infrastructural and socioeconomic environments, and the ownership and material extent of the cultural and scholarly record. He is currently senior editor of Archipelagos Journal, co-organizer of the Caribbean Digital Annual Conference, and co-principal investigator of the Caribbean Digital Scholarship Collective, founded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Tonight, I'm very excited because he's going to discuss the difficulties of speaking freely under and beyond fascism, with reference to his translation and introduction of Aimé Césaire's original version of And the Dogs Were Silent, a historical drama pretty much unknown until Alex discovered it in 2008, and we'll learn more about that. Based on the Haitian Revolution and Toussaint Louverture, composed by Césaire during World War II under the watchful eyes of the Vichy censors in Martinique. Alex's research has opened my eyes to the radicality of And the Dogs Were Silent as a work of art and a work of history, which, as far as I know, has never been staged, but which has a particular relevance to our present moment, in which we are obliged to ask ourselves what resources we have to encounter the rise of neo-fascism and the far right. So without further ado, over to you, Alex. Alex is going to speak for about half an hour, and then we'll have some questions for him. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. Can everybody hear me? I'm going to assume you can. All right. So, as Malcolm said, I am revisiting a text that was written during the height of fascism in the French-speaking world. It's also the height of fascism in Europe and elsewhere in the world, aka the World War II period. I'm going to start by telling you the history of this text. Then I am going to stop for a moment and tell you a little bit about the world in which it was written. So I'm going to tell you first the long history, and then we're going to focus a little bit on 1941 and 1942 while it was being written. And then if we have time, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the computational magic that I've been able to do to even go deeper into the questions at hand. I definitely want to get to the part where we talk about why this text is important to us now. Why are we here? And why perhaps you should put this text in your bookshelf and give it a read. So let's start with the history of the play. First, actually, let's start with the history of the title, And the Dogs Were Silent. A text with that title was published in 1946, And the Dogs Were Silent, Les chiens se taisaient, in a collection of poetry. After the war, the collection of poetry had other poems by Césaire, and this title occupied about half of that book. We can call that text a closet drama. There are no specific references to history. There are no specific references to geography. The whole drama takes place in what could be read as a madhouse. And the main character is called the Rebel. The Rebel is presented with a series of temptations by a motherly figure, a son, a lover, colonial administrators, etc., a priest, trying to convince him to stop rebelling, to stop fighting for freedom. And the rebel refuses, rejects all these temptations, and dies tragically at the end, having refused all temptations to abandon revolution. That text is what we knew as "And the Dogs Were Silent" for decades until 2008. I will revisit what happens in 2008 when I discover the text, when I identify it. Before I get to that, though, let's backtrack a little bit. In 1941, during the height of the Vichy regime in Martinique, he starts writing a text with the same title. The text he starts writing, though, is a very different text than the one that is published in 1946. So different that I don't have any problem saying that this is a different work of art. This text he was writing, started writing in 1941, was a theater play. And it was definitely based on the Haitian Revolution. The first line of the play is, "We are in Saint-Domingue at the beginning of the French Revolution." That play, the one that I just translated and published, goes through from the beginning of the Haitian Revolution all the way to 1804. So the play ends in 1804 when the Céline finally declares independence from France. All the geographical references are there. All the historical characters are there. It is a historical play. Same title. In 1943, he finishes the draft of this historical play. And he sends it to New York in November of 1943. This is 3 months after the Vichy regime has been toppled in Martinique, not yet in continental France, but in Martinique. The forces of Free France were able to dislodge the government of Admiral Robert, which was the little petty local dictator that represented the Vichy government in Martinique. Fascinating character. We don't have time to talk about him. But this is a moment of reprieve. During the Vichy regime in Martinique, there was a lot of censorship. In fact, the journal which Césaire founded with his wife Suzanne and a couple of friends, Tropique, which is recognized and read today as being one of the landmarks in the history of Caribbean literature, was eventually censored under this regime at the beginning of 1943. And even before then, Césaire had claimed that they had, the censors, mutilated the journal about 20 times. When he sends this manuscript to New York, this is 3 months after that regime is no longer in power. But he writes to André Breton in the same letter in which he sends him the manuscript that he needed to get the text out of the colonies. Now, André Breton is collaborating at this particular juncture with another French poet, Yvan Goll, who is running a journal called Hémisphère, which also has a publishing house called Édition Hémisphère. And Breton has been sharing the Césaire texts with him to publish them in New York. Now, the first such publication comes in issue number 2 and 3 of Hémisphère, in which Breton and Goll each present a new poet from the Caribbean. The issue is a special issue in the Caribbean called "The Discovery of the Caribbean," unironically, in which Gold presents Nicolas Guillen and Breton presents Aimé Césaire. This particular relationship between these two characters in New York is very important to the history of this play. In 1924, both of them had published a manifesto, a surrealist manifesto, 2 weeks apart from each other. Ivan Gold published his surrealist manifesto first, and André Breton published his second. They got into a big fight about who had the rights to call their movement surrealist. The word surrealism itself comes from a 1917 poem by Apollinaire. Apparently that fight was horrible, and Gold went to a cafe and punched Breton in the face, and they became enemies. During the war, in a moment of vulnerability perhaps, they reconciled. And this is how this friendship allowed Césaire to have a venue in New York. It was around this time, when they're still reconciled, that Césaire hands over the manuscript to Ivan Gold for a possible publication as a book. Now, what happens is that they fight again. Breton and Gold get into another fight. This time they didn't punch each other. And no matter how many times Breton asked Gold to return the manuscripts, Gold never did. At the end of the war in 1945, Gold returns to France, and he carries with him the manuscript. The manuscript will lie there, unregarded, unidentified, in his papers in a small municipal library in the small town of Saint-Pierre-des-Bouches in the Alsace region until 2008, in which, just coincidentally, I happened to be reading the biography of Ivan Gold and read a footnote that says that there's an unidentified manuscript belonging to Césaire in the municipal library. I find some resources to travel there, and that's how the play surfaces for us, thankfully. All right, so now you know how I landed on this text, but let's go back to 1944, when Breton is asking Gold to please return the manuscripts. Césaire, around this time, changes his mind. He doesn't want this text published. In fact, that is the motivation for Breton insisting that Gold return the papers. Césaire claims in a letter to Breton that this text is too historical, that it is a product of the circumstances in which it was written, and that he wants to embrace a kind of poetry that moves away from the subject matter. He calls it a poetry that embraces life. He confesses to Breton in something that I still find funny, that he heard a voice, like hearing voices. He heard a voice that told him that this drama was personal, that this drama was about him and not about history. It was about his own internal struggles and not really about the struggles, the revolutionary struggles of the Haitian people. Because the text was never returned, at some point everybody stopped worrying about it, and Césaire started editing the text. Ironically, in the year 1944, Césaire was invited to be part of a cultural mission to Haiti, and he spent most of the year 1944 in Haiti, and he was there, and this we know from correspondence with with Henri Césaire, who was the cultural attaché who invited him to be part of this cultural mission, that it was there that he changed this play to what was published in 1946. So paradoxically, he erased Haiti and the Haitian Revolution while in Haiti. Now, when I found the text, I published it in going back to 2008. When I found the text, I published it in French, originally in a diplomatic edition, which is the type of edition that respects the erasures and additions of the original manuscript as part of the complete works of Aimé Césaire that was published here by Planète Libre. I think it was eventually published in 2015, 2016. So the Parisian intelligentsia has known about this text for a while. It's already been explored by the critics in French. But right before the pandemic, I started conversations with the press about doing a translation of it to make it the text available to English-speaking audiences, because I believe that the text was relevant to what was happening in the world at that particular moment. We had Donald Trump in his first presidency, and we could see already the rise of the extreme right, all around the world, not only in the English-speaking world. So Duke agreed, and this is how this volume, the one that I'm talking to you about today, is published, which has a preface by Brent Hay Edwards, an introduction by me with a lot more detail than I can offer you right now. It has a translation into English and the original text edited for a reading public, meaning I don't go too scholarly on that edition. I simply prepare a text for the reading public based on Césaire's intentions, as far as I could tell what they were when he sent the manuscript, based on his final editions, respecting all of his deletions, etc. All right. That's the history of the text, more or less in general terms, and how we arrive at the text today. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what the play is about, so you get a context about why it's important, because it's not only about the Haitian Revolution, or it is, or hold on, let me drink some water. Make you a little bit of a summary of the play, so you understand why he wrote it in secret, and perhaps even why he sent it to New York even after Vichy had been toppled. Play has 3 acts. The main character of the play is Toussaint Louverture. Toussaint Louverture is, of course, one of the heroes of the Haitian Revolution. He did not reach the end. He did not get to see independence because he died in a prison in France, having been betrayed by Napoleon, which is covered in the play. In the play, Toussaint Louverture is in dialogue with the people of Haiti. Sometimes he's in dialogue with French delegates. But for most of the play, he's in dialogue with a chorus and 2 narrators, which in French are gendered. So a woman and a man. Now, in the first act, we see the beginning of the revolution. These are the rebellions that take place in the north part of the island. The white plantation owners don't realize the danger they're in. And in the first act, they still assume they're going to win. And the language that comes from them is a language of benevolence, condescending benevolence, arrogance. And the responses from Toussaint, and what the play wants you to take away from this, is that even though they speak of equality, it's mostly hypocritical language. The second act takes place more or less around the middle of the revolution, when Toussaint is already risen to being the most powerful person in Haiti, where he continues to sustain that he is loyal to the Republic, to the French Revolution. But the French Revolution keeps sending delegates that speak this language of equality, but Toussaint can read right through it as hypocritical language. And then the final act, the third act, is the imprisonment of Toussaint. It takes place in France, in the Jura Mountains, in the Alps, where Toussaint ended, was eventually imprisoned and ended his life after Napoleon asked him for a meeting. Well, Napoleon's representative in Haiti asked him for a meeting and shackled him and sent him to France. He ends up dying of pneumonia without proper food or clothes in this prison. And the third act takes place here, where the representatives of Napoleon send him temptations to get him to relent from, his cause. This is where you see the third act. The third act is more or less what becomes the text that was eventually published in 1946. This is the overall structure of the play. Here's the problem, though. Throughout this whole play, the chorus of the play is death to the whites. And something that is consistent from beginning to end is the absolute celebration of the Black Revolution without any apologies, without any justification. It is a bloody, bloody, hard to read, violent theater of cruelty play about fighting for freedom without apology. Perhaps I don't need to tell you this. In the year 2025, we still have not had an epic blockbuster film about the Haitian Revolution. We've had several about the American Revolution. We've had several about the French Revolution. At no point yet we have had something equivalent for the Haitian Revolution, even though the Haitian Revolution was the first revolution to ban slavery permanently for humanity. It is also the first successful slave rebellion that forms a country in the modern era. If you read the Constitution, if you read what's going on back in those days, it's also the most egalitarian of the revolutions in terms of how they divided the democracy and the laws that they set in place. Well, at least arguably the most egalitarian. It is definitely should be considered part of a triangle of revolutions: the French, American, and the Haitian. In fact, Latin American revolutions were more inspired by the Haitian and actually went to train in Haiti, like Bolivar, Simon Bolivar went to train in Haiti, than the American Revolution or the French. Despite all of this, talking about this particular revolution, at least in the mainstream, has proven to be very difficult from the 19th century until the present. In fact, it was forbidden in the United States and other parts of the world to talk about this revolution if you were Black. So this is the challenge. We're not only talking about the silence of the Vichy regime, we're talking about the 2 centuries old and challenge of being able to have this conversation. Can we celebrate the Haitian Revolution without apology in the same way that we celebrate the American Revolution or the French Revolution? Yeah, sure. The French Revolution, we talk about how it evolved pretty quickly into a bloody spectacle and how that led to Napoleon. So that one's a little complicated. But the American one is usually celebrated as yes. All revolutions, all 3 of these revolutions were bloody. Of course, they belong to the same period. There's nothing more bloody about one than the other. And they both are fighting for egalitarianism and freedom. Anyways, so this is the challenge, right? And this is why perhaps it is difficult for Césaire even to, have this play be there even after Martinique has been liberated when he sends it to New York. Allow me to drink a little water. Now, I think I do have a little time to talk about the computational magic and about the conditions within Martinique around this time at the same time. So please bear with me because this is the part where I get really excited about my own nerd interests. I am a professor of digital humanities. Most of my work that does not involve Caribbean literature is around the use of advanced computational techniques in order to do the work of the humanities. Now, with this particular play, I did something a little bit original and something that I still think is pretty cool. I did it many years ago, but I still find it quite charming as an experiment. So let me share my screen and show you a little bit of this manuscript and what it looks like so that you can understand what I did. Let me see if I can share it here. I'm guessing you can see this screen well. Just put a thumbs up on the emoji if you can. All right, cool. So this is the manuscript. This is a photograph of the original manuscript or typescript as I found it in the municipal library in San Diego del Ocho. As you can see, there are many corrections on each page. I want you to notice also how there's different pagination schemes on the top. And also how the corrections are done with different writing instruments. Sometimes it's a very dark pencil. Sometimes it's a very light pencil. Sometimes it's blue ink. Sometimes it's red ink. There are also different types of paper. Let me scroll down here way farther down so you can see a different kind of paper. I should have loaded the whole thing before. But here, I can show you here. Here, you can see it right quick. There's these 4 different types of paper. There's also 2 different kinds of carbon paper. Now, I don't know, those of you who are old enough to have used typewriters when you were young, you remember that we use carbon paper in order to create a copy. And the copy mostly is just the residue from the carbon. Now, the manuscript you see here, none of it is original. Everything is a carbon copy. And there's 2 kinds of carbon paper, black and blue. Now, there's also, here are the different writing utensils used to make corrections. Now, what I did, and this is the fun part. Let me stop sharing. What I did was I actually tagged absolutely every single material trace, the pagination, the different writing instruments, the different papers, everything. I put it in code. And then I wrote a small algorithm to calculate the logic of which can come first and which cannot come later. It's kind of like please show me the stage, please computer, show me the stages of composition. What are the first pages you wrote? Which ones are the last? According to the logic of like, this cannot be present if this other thing is present. Now, the results were astonishing to me. Here, let me share again because I can actually give you a bird's eye view of what the computer releases. The computer, according to the algorithm I wrote, was able to generate for me 9 stages of composition. But it was the first one that was really astonishing. When I asked the computer to produce the text and not just a visualization of this, the text that it spit out as the first thing that, according to the material evidence he wrote, was the most theatrical part of the whole manuscript. And in fact, Toussaint Louverture wasn't even the hero yet. So the first thing that he sat down to write was a straightforward historical drama about the Haitian Revolution without a tragic hero, in which the hero of those first 22 pages that he wrote was the people of Haiti. And that to me was astonishing because that means that he went through 3 stages of revision. One in which he starts writing a play about the people of Haiti. Later on, you have to understand Aimé Césaire, for those of you who don't know. Aimé Césaire was also a politician, and he became representative of Martinique for decades in the Communist Party ticket. But at this particular stage in his life, he's still not a politician. We would have to wait until after the war before he becomes an important politician in France. In this particular stage, he's a young teacher in high school, and he starts writing this play in which the people are the hero. And it is written in a very accessible language, which, if you know Césaire, is also fascinating because Césaire's poetry is difficult, but these 22 pages are written in a very accessible vernacular that a general public could understand. So when he starts doing this, he's envisioning a performance. Now, Toussaint Louverture, during the stages of composition, then starts playing a role until he eventually becomes the center of the play, and all three acts revolve around his own trajectory. And it is Toussaint Louverture who speaks in the most poetic language that we find in the play. And it is easy to understand how that poetry in Toussaint's voice then becomes all of the poetry in the published versions of 1946 without Toussaint. Now, in Martinique in 1941, it would have been impossible for him to stage this play. So these pages that he's writing in 1941, very violent, very celebratory of revolutionary violence, are being written in secret for a play, for a stage he's only imagining. At the same time that he was writing this play, accessible play about Black victory, he's writing some of the most difficult to read poetry, surrealist poetry you can imagine in the pages of his journal, Tropique. Now, this is a little bit about what I wanted to talk to you today about. Because the general theme that I proposed to you was the possibilities and impossibilities of freedom of expression. When he starts writing in Tropique, there's all kinds of subterfuge and camouflage that we are able to see once we understand that they're writing this under the watchful eye of the censors. Now, some of the things that they did in the early issues of Tropique, for example, was make references to fascist authors or to authors that have been appropriated by the fascists. Sometimes subtle references, sometimes direct references. I will give you an example. In that first issue of that journal published in March of 1941 of Tropique, Césaire has a section that he writes in praise of the poet Charles Péguy. Péguy is a difficult to pin poet in the French tradition because he celebrates the workers of the land. He celebrates courage. He himself was a defender of Republican values. At the same time, he is also known for his religiosity, his Catholicism, and for his praise of Frenchness and the land. So, ambiguous figure. Well, the fascists have definitely appropriated him. In fact, the Vichy regime's motto, which had replaced Égalité, Fraternité, man, I'm forgetting the third, was replaced with family, work, and values, I think it was. But sorry, it's a little late here. Embarrassed. In any case, most of their propaganda and ideology worked really well with Péguy. So when the editors of Tropique, Aimé Césaire included, are publishing the first issue, of course they're going to put Péguy because he can work both ways. So when you praise the land in Martinique, a Martinican reader is going to read themselves, but the censors are going to read, oh, Péguy, yes, the land, the French land. So it was this kind of tricks. He also uses Nietzsche semi-overtly and also invites fascist writers to contribute to the journal, even though what they publish in the journal is not itself fascist. So he was playing these games there, and his poetry did not have historical allusions, did not touch the question of race directly, did not speak of open revolution. But interestingly enough, if you read the first a couple of his first poems he wrote. If you read them today, you read an incredible freedom in them. And this is the first distinction, and perhaps the most important one I make with you today, which is there is a difference between freedom of expression and expressing freedom, which Césaire is exploring around this time. So he's doing two things. He's writing this very violent play with the chorus "Death to the Ones" in secret, and at the same time he's writing this very obscure poetry in which he explores the freedom to write poetry, or what freedom can poetry give you. So here's what he does. The first poem is called Fragments of a Poem, and he divided it in two parts. And in this poem, he is exploring the idea of what it means to write really freely. It's not just free verse. It's not just getting rid of rhymes. Yes, he does that. It's not, or regular meter. He does that. It's not getting rid of French regular punctuation. He does that. No. It's the poem itself. It's about the abilities that the poet has to experience death, to destroy whole worlds. There's an apocalyptic scene that lasts for several pages in this poem in which he empties the earth of everything, including gods. And at some point, the earth swallows the moon because the earth cannot stand the fact that there are other things besides the earth. The earth just swallows everything, including the sun. So it's this freedom that the poet has to imagine total destruction. The poet also imagines what happens when you reverse time, the direction of time. So the theme of the poem generally is that we're in the third day of creation in Genesis, where God creates plants. But instead of moving to the fourth day of creation, he moves to the second, and then to the first, and then beyond the first chapter of Genesis. And this is a freedom that the poet has. The poet has the capacity to even reverse time, the flow of time. The poet also has the capacity to imagine his own death. And if you read the poem, you will see that the poet dies. And he describes this in beautiful poetry. And we have to deal with it as readers. The poet is dead. So the poet is taking his mind in incredible directions. But the one thing, and apparently that's fine, destroying worlds and dying in front of everybody. Apparently all those things can pass censorship as long as you don't have these references. And at the same time that he's doing this, he's writing this in secret. Now, the paradox of all of this is that after the end of the war, instead of leaning in the direction of now I'm going to express myself freely, I'm going to say the things that I wasn't able to say when I had the fascists on my back. I'm actually going to pursue this kind of poetic freedom that I discovered while I was doing that. And this, I think, is probably one of the most important things in poetic terms that I see happening in the war years. And even several years after the war, until 1948, in which he publishes an essay called Discourse on Colonialism, which many of you know because it's where the idea of the imperial boomerang is born. The idea that the colonizer eventually pay the chickens come home to roost eventually. If you dehumanize people in your empire, eventually you will dehumanize people living inside of the metropole, right? That's the imperial boomerang idea, which has been explored and is continuing to explore and resonates even in social media with the kids today. Until he publishes this essay, all of his poetry and all of his texts went in the opposite direction, in the direction of writing poetry where the poet can explore his freedom at a larger scale, rather than poetry that describes historical freedom. Now, I will conclude really briefly. I went over by 3 or 4 minutes here. I will conclude briefly with what I wanted to conclude, which is why is this important to us today? There's several reasons why recovering the historical play is important to us today. First of all, I'm not convinced that one should have either or. Even though the poet had to make a decision and leaned one way, I think it is important for us to have art of both types. I think historical art that allows us to think about these things as prophecies that were once fulfilled and that can be fulfilled again is just as important as having the type of art that pushes us in directions that have no anchor in a history. That's one. Two, it is important to think to this dynamics, not only reading this lost play, but also understanding that this lost play was being produced at the same time as this other poetry I was just talking to you about that I think is important for us to consider. As we all navigate how comfortable we are talking about this or that in this particular moment. Freedom of expression is taking a hit in the United States. It's not comparable yet to what was happening in Nazi France, to a lesser extent in Vichy France. But it is still, though, astonishing to us how far down the rabbit hole of repression we have gone, mostly because auto-censorship is stronger than official state censorship. And I see it. I see a lot of my colleagues already choosing not to, participate in social media, choosing not to give this paper, choosing not to say this thing. Let me give you an example. I'm gonna connect something for you here that I think is something we experience in the United States, similarly to the way that you're experiencing it in England. For example, in this play, there is a scene. The play starts with the chorus coming to warn a French white woman and her daughters in a plantation that war is coming, that the carnage is coming. The French woman doesn't believe it. The little girls laugh at the chorus. In the beginning of Act 3, towards the end of Act 2, we see the same women and her daughters running for their lives. And we don't see them getting killed. They're being chased by rebels. But it is understood that that's exactly what happens. That the revolutionaries kill these women and these two kids. That's cruel, unconscionable, war crime, as we call it, of the same people we're celebrating as they went. It is impossible today to both condemn Hamas in Palestine, in England, and in the United States, while also acknowledging that they're the only ones fighting with guns for Palestinian freedom. Right? I don't like them any more than I like the government of Israel. But it's hard for people to acknowledge that they're the only ones fighting for freedom. To fight for freedom comes with that particular challenge to speech. And this text deals with it. And this situation that I've been describing deals with it. And I think perhaps it's useful for us to have these artistic contributions from the past for us to be able to understand and navigate our own challenges in speaking today. Third and final, the thing why I think it's important is because I think Haiti still suffers from misunderstanding at the international scale. I'm not going to go into the details, but still in the press, we get this understanding, especially now with the problem with the gangs in Port-au-Prince, we get this understanding that Haiti is a failed revolution. Turns out the story of Haiti is a lot more complicated than that. And it has a lot to do with neo-imperialism. And the situation today connects back to the global systems that did not allow the Haitian Revolution to succeed. Not only were we not allowed to talk about it, it just wasn't allowed to succeed. So for that sense too, it is important for us to, any kind of contribution like this of a major poet that can give us a strong work of art for us to continue that conversation in smart ways, I think is valuable. So with that, I hope that you stop listening to me and rush to the store to get the book. You won't be disappointed. I'll put a link to the book in a second. in the chat. I think I already see questions there, so we can get to the fun part, which is the
Yes.
conversation we can have with each other.
Well, Alex, that was magnificent. Thank you so much. And I think you took us on the story of finding the text as a drama in itself, and that was very intriguing. But then you laid out, as it were, Césaire's conflicts, all wrapped up in his appropriation by surrealism. But one thing that intrigued me with this division between the historical text written in secret and the experimental text written, as it were, more openly. Where does and you mentioned when he's on his visit to Haiti, he's almost censoring himself, ironically, while being in Haiti. What do you think Haiti meant to him? What did it mean to Césaire?
Two things come out of Haiti that are equally important for the direction that this text took. One is that, and we know this from his correspondence after, with his correspondence with Henri Séric, the cultural attaché of France in New York, who actually facilitated the job for him and Toussaint Louverture, his wife, in Haiti. He told them that he was disappointed with the trip because at this particular moment in time, the Haitian society was racially divided between the light-skinned black folks who had control of the government and of the riches of the country, and the black masses. And Césaire was treated as a dark-skinned poet, not in the same way as Nicolas Guillen was treated, for example, who was there several years before and was treated like royalty. And Césaire was not treated like this by the elite. This is the regime of Elite Escot. Interestingly enough, when Breton came a year later, it led to revolution, and they toppled the government. Interesting chapter, not related to my talk, but I encourage you all to explore that chapter. Césaire was disillusioned in what he saw, and he said as much. He could not believe that there was racial hierarchy of this sort there. The other thing that is important, and I'm not allowed to go into too much detail in the public record because of agreements with archives here in France, not to talk about these things, is that his marriage was suffering, and he was very depressed because of what was happening in his marriage. And in a letter to André Breton, which I am allowed to talk about, he does say that in one letter that he would like his wife to be erased from this one poem that he has sent him, and that it was a mistake to include him. And it was around this time in which the character of the lover is introduced in the play that was eventually published in 1946, and that character actually becomes one of the most important, the second most important character in the play. And the whole point about the lover in that other play is that he rejects her. So the lover is trying to get him not to be so revolutionary, and he lives out this fantasy in that other text where he's like, "No, I live by my principles. Women shall not, stop me from my revolutionary goals." So this is all happening in Haiti.
So I'm beginning to get it. I said, I'm gonna move on now. Adrian, can you talk to your question?
No.
Is that possible? Can you come online, or shall I read it out?
It's funny because sometimes scholars, we know too much. This is the problem. We learn too much, and the thing is that it's much more intellectually exciting to talk about, some kind of conceptual movement that is driving him to write, towards poetic freedom rather than, like to express these historical realities. But it's just that the evidence on the ground points.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Well, and then you end up with having to dance around the demands of the French archivists. So I don't think Adrian can actually show or ask his question, but what I'm going to, I don't know whether you can see it up there, the first question. Our former colleague Stella Odenlami staged an intertextual work cross-cutting Heine Muller's The Mission and C.L.R. James's The Black Jacobins, both about the Haitian Revolution, with acting and performance students from Wimbledon, which, as I just mentioned earlier, is our performance-based college dealing with theory, practice, and history performance. It was interesting to see how post-dramatic theatre forms went further in anchoring the works in lived historical experience and students' sense of diasporic inheritance than literary dramatic text. And here's the question. Do you think the scope in the Césaire text for a contemporary direction and critical treatment? Malcolm mentioned that it's not been staged. I wonder if this is a question of identifying an appropriate theatrical form for the dramatic text. Is the first 22 pages the key to this?
Let me talk a little bit about C.L.R. James, and then I'll answer the theater question. It's a short answer of that is that it's the way it is perfectly stageable. But the C.L.R. James question is treated in the preface written by Brent Edwards. And he points out that there's a fascinating rhythm that they share. Both of them, Césaire and C.L.R. James, were working on a play on the Haitian Revolution in 1933, both of them were doing research on the Haitian Revolution in 1933, 1934. Césaire was a student here in Paris, but C.L.R. James came here around the same time in order to do the research he needed to do for his play on the Haitian Revolution and Toussaint Louverture, which he did, and it was actually performed in England in 1936, and the text has just resurfaced recently, like about 10 years ago. The text of that, the lost text of that, resurfaced. So there was also a component of a lost text there with C.L.R. James that resurfaced recently. But also, both Césaire and C.L.R. James also did a historical work. Césaire wrote about a monograph called Toussaint Louverture and the Question of Liberty, much later, 1961, 1962, which has many parallels with the Black Jacobins and many differences, of course, texts that have been compared before. So they both gravitated back and forth between theater and historical monograph. I think, and that is fascinating. And nobody yet, as Brent Edwards points out, and this is to the students in the room, has sat down with these kind of rhythms to compare why do they switch genres back and forth over a period of 3 decades with their differences and similarities. I think there's a fascinating study there to be done. All right, the question of the theater. Even though those first 22 pages are purely easy, super easy to stage, that is not to say that the text I published it in Duke Press, which is a clean edition of the manuscript that you saw on your screens, is not stageable. It is absolutely perfectly stageable. The 3 acts actually have clear staging directions. It is true, though, that theatricality is lost in the revisions already. Let me give you an example. So in that first, so that you understand like why I say that those first 22 pages are way more theatrical and cool for a theater than what you could do with it today if you just publish the final version. And in that sense, you might be right. The key to it might be those 22 pages. In the beginning, he was using in the play the techniques of Erwin Piscator, which were passed down to Bertolt Brecht, most famously, who used it throughout his career. Erwin Piscator is the founder of what is known today as the documentarist theater. I'll skip to the cool tidbits, which is, for example, this is the first person to say that we should be projecting big crowds and big documents in the back of the stage. Remember, back in those days, theaters and movie theaters were exactly the same building, and it was exactly the same place. Like, and that was the case in Martinique, but it was also the case in New York and Paris. It was just like movies on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and theater play on Wednesdays and Fridays. And so you had projection capabilities there, and then theater writers, most famously in France, Claudel, and in Germany, of course, Brecht and Piscator were taking advantage of this. So they were projecting hard-to-stage scenes in the back of the in a screen in the back. Well, once Césaire starts writing this in those first 22 pages, he's using these techniques, and they're there. They're erased later, but they're there. And not only is he using them, he's using them exactly in the way that Claudel used them for his 1936 play Christopher Columbus, the Book of Christopher Columbus. Now, this is important detail. I'm glad you brought this up. Christopher Columbus was Claudel's idea of the total theatrical work, kind of like Wagner, like Toto's Kunstwerk, or like we're gonna do something with everything, right? We're just gonna put it all on the stage. And that whole play is about Christopher Columbus being tempted by many people not to leave for the Americas. But Columbus has a vision in his head that he must conquer these lands, that God has told him that he's going to spread Christianity all around the world. And remember, Claudel at this particular moment is like completely full-on right-wing Christian. That Columbus is this heroic force that must resist temptations that hold him back from his destiny. Does the plot sound familiar? The, this whole play is about Toussaint Louverture resisting the temptations of those who would hold them back from sending all the white people back to Europe.
Right.
But he uses the same theatrical techniques, and it's more visible in the early stages than in the later stage. So I'm with you, Adrian. I think if we do this, maybe we shouldn't go by only what the final version is. We should rescue some of that original theatricality from the earlier stages of the Thai school.
Well, maybe you and Adrian can talk about this. But anyway, so there's another question from Michael. Thank you for a fascinating talk. That is true. How does Césaire's project for a poetic avant-garde freedom sit within the Communist Party? That is the experimental freedom. Also, and does the connection with Breton have a connection to this question?
Okay, so Césaire's career from 1946 until the 1957 is marked, or right towards the end of the 60s, is marked by this question. People want to know. People want to know the answer. So, are you a communist or are you a surrealist? Right? The question wasn't even clear for somebody like Breton. The answer to that question. Breton considered himself to be a leftist, but Breton perhaps is the closest we have around this time to what today has become in the United States the Democratic Socialist Party, who produces somebody like Mandani, who just won in the election. These are people who want an egalitarian society, but are not willing to give up freedom. And in fact, they say that it is freedom itself. Like Bob Marley used to say, it's like you got to free your mind first. It is the freedom of the mind itself which can be the guarantee of that egalitarian society. That's their idea. And they are hopeful for a brighter future, as opposed to Dada, who were total pessimists and said that life was absurd and there was no point. These are optimists, and they want to build a better society, but they want a society in which you don't lose your freedom. And that's key, because that idea is still with us. I personally kind of lean towards that idea. If I had to declare myself something, I would say, yes, give me an egalitarian society, but I don't want to give up on my freedom. Now, in 1956, Césaire will break with the Communist Party. When he actually became the candidate for the Communist Party in Martinique in 1946, it was almost an accident. He was already popular because of the journal, and the Communist Party just wanted somebody popular that the kids liked. They kind of got him because he was charismatic. Like, it was like a Mamdani situation. It's like he could help them win, and he did. And then he stayed with the Communist Party until 1957. But because the Communist Party was a subsidiary of the French Communist Party, that's when the problems arise. So one of the most famous things that he wrote was his letter quitting from the Communist Party. And it was a letter directed to Maurice Thoré, who was like the age of Biden or Trump around that time, telling him that the problem with the Communist Party was that they did not understand race very well. And they kept saying that we will deal with the black problem after we win the global communist revolution, right? After we deal with class, then we'll deal with race. And Césaire understood that that wasn't going to help his people, and he formed his own party. It was also around the same time, that he had this very public debate with the Haitian poet René Depestre. And the whole debate was around Depestre wanted to break from surrealism, or that strand of avant-garde writing, and joined the team which is now known as the Aragon team, which is more social realism. He wanted to write a poetry. René Depestre wanted to write a poetry that was more social realistic, more accessible to people. And Césaire rebuked him publicly. He said, "At no point should the black poet in particular, give up on his freedom."
Right. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a question from Paul Goodwin, who is the director of TrAIN Research Centre. Thanks for an excellent talk, Alex. Can you speak a bit about the relationship of this text to Césaire's ideology of négritude? The violent chorus you referred to seems to go against, to some extent, the emollient attitude of early négritude, which focused on the aesthetic and effective aspects of blackness.
That's a hard one, because it's not a movement yet. It hasn't congealed yet as an ideology. Not yet. It will eventually congeal a little bit later in the 50s, when there's an international movement around it, and in fact, its ideology becomes influential in the independence movements, both in the Caribbean and in Africa, right? So later on, many things happen, and of course, there's a bigger black presence in the world publishing and distribution in the 50s than there is in the 40. That leads to kind of this congealment. But at this particular point, negritude was a word that he had already used. He was, in fact, the first one to use it in the 30s. He had used it, but he used it loosely. He used it loosely. And at this particular time, I think the fairest approach to reading negritude in this particular, because he doesn't use it in the play, he's not using it necessarily in the poems he's writing around this time. It gets thrown around a couple of times in the journal, and not necessarily by him. Is that it's a cluster of themes. Now, this is how the critics, there's a consensus more or less around the critics, starting with James Arnold in the 1980s, that this is a thematic universe. That in fact is captured better than anywhere else in the 1946 version of the play that had erased the Haitian Revolution and everything. Because if you read that play, it's just this loosey-goosey memories of Africanness and Black history that don't get a precise coordinate in geography or in history, right? So we just have these evocations that the reader, if they know their history and they know their geography, we can place here, we can place there in time and space, but it's not precise coordinates. But in its looseness, he does get to evoke a range of historical experiences from the slave trade and even before the slave trade to the present, in their relating to Black history in the Atlantic world and in Africa. So a universe of thematic concerns, let's call it, around this time.
Well, that's really interesting. Okay, I think we're slightly over time, but are there any further questions? I can't see any being typed in. I really want to say this was absolutely marvelous. Really, really rich. Everything packed in there with the discovery of the text, what the text is about, what the text means for us, and ending up with a sense of, well, we're all being asked the same question there. What do I do? Do I just fly off into experimentalism, or do I face reality? I was reminded of that bit of Borges, where he does that parable of fascism in Toulon, where he ends up saying, well, I'm just going to end up doing a translation of Thomas Brown. And you think, well, that's one way to go.
There might be something there to keep the seed of freedom even if you have to hide it, there might be something there to keeping the seed of freedom inside the poetry, even though the censors cannot
Yes.
see it. That
Yes.
wow, the gumption of this poet to actually do these marvelous, fantastic things, right?
Yeah.
The ability to fantasize. There might be something there, but yes, Malcolm, I prefer we fight directly. I
Yeah.
like my resistance with a capital R.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Northern Ireland in the 70s, so I do understand exactly what that means. Anyway, well, look, Alex, it's been great seeing you. Have a great time and rest of your time in Paris, and we're all very pleased to have heard you speak, and also we're all going to go and buy your text, of course, as you
Yeah.
mentioned.
Thank
So
you for having me. Thank you for
thank
having
you
me, and thank you
thank you very
everybody for
much.
coming. Have a
Good
good
night.
evening, everybody. Bye bye.
Good night.